In the previous session, we focused on approaches to answering the question, what do my students need to know? In today's session, we will explore the question, how will I cause learning? We will take one of the student learning objectives you identified last session and consider the various instructional planning practices you can employ to cause learning in a student-centered learning environment focused on the unique interests and needs of your students. To begin, please refer back to the student learning objective you developed during the previous learning session on student learning objectives. The example shown is a student learning objective for the course Principles of Biosciences. Given the method used to dispose of a common household waste product, students will identify and explain at least two potential impacts the waste product can have on the environment. This objective is a starting place in the lesson planning process. Let's hear one voice from the field.
When I'm slammed and short on time to prep a lesson, I either make a PowerPoint to present the information to students, or I just talk to the class about the content. That way I know I'm covering the objective.
All too often, we find ourselves in a similar position, crunched for time, looking for teacher-directed approaches to meet student learning objectives. In today's session, let's work together and take just a few minutes to consider alternative approaches. When you can, try to step back in your lesson planning process and consider how you might target your student learning objectives with student-centered activities. The T-TESS Dimension 1.4 on activities is a great place to start. If I review the Distinguished Practice column on the left-hand side, I can get ideas for student-centered actions and instructional approaches. After review, I start to consider questioning strategies, purposeful grouping, student goal setting and accountability, and activities, resources, technology, and instructional materials that actively engage students. To start planning, I choose to focus on one of these ideas, questioning strategies. The T-TESS framework encourages me to consider how to create opportunities for students to generate questions that lead to further inquiry and promote complex, higher-order thinking, problem-solving, and real-world application. So, I start brainstorming. I know I'm looking for student-centered activities that provide opportunities for students to generate questions that lead to further inquiry, promote complex, higher-order thinking, promote problem-solving, and promote real-world application. I really like the idea of real-world application to explore this concept. How can I get students thinking about waste and environmental impact in a personal way? Maybe a trash on your back challenge, where I challenge students to carry the trash they generate over the course of a week on their backs. This is a great way to help students visualize the amount of waste they produce, but it doesn't really get at the environmental impact part of my student objective. So I'll keep that idea in mind and continue brainstorming. Next, I consider having students conduct a personal waste eco-audit. A personal waste eco-audit sets the stage for students to reflect on their personal waste production and leads to further inquiry. Students are likely to ask questions like, how much waste does the average person produce? And how does my own daily waste production compare to that average? Then, if I ask students to reflect on their personal waste production, I can promote higher-order thinking questions like, what would happen if every person on Earth created as much waste as I do? As a natural extension, I can challenge students to bring awareness to the potential negative environmental impacts of waste production and to modify their own personal behaviors. Maybe even they'll encourage others to do so as well. A personal waste eco-audit seems like a great way to engage students through real-world application. I also need to bring in the potential environmental impact of waste to address my specific learning objective. As a next step, I could have students choose one type of waste from their personal waste eco-audit and investigate the environmental impact if that waste goes into the trash versus into the recycling bin or out of a car window. I think it's important to incorporate a group problem-solving activity into this work. So maybe I can have students form groups based on the type of waste they want to become experts in. Now, please pause this learning session and give the planning process a try. Start by choosing one of the research-based instructional planning practices described under Distinguished Teacher Practice in the T-TESS 1.4 framework. Choose one instructional practice that you find interesting or have always wanted to explore. Then, brainstorm ideas for a student-centered lesson activity that utilizes your chosen practice. In Principles of Biosciences, I've decided to move forward with the personal waste eco-audit idea. I created a student handout, an activity outline, a series of reflection questions to promote higher-order thinking. I decided on a structure for group work that will help ensure students take ownership of group and individual responsibilities. And I plan to have students reflect on, evaluate, and hold each other accountable within their instructional groups. Now, give it a try. Apply this new instructional practice in your own CTE class. Consider asking a trusted colleague, another CTE teacher, a mentor, or maybe even your department chair to observe this lesson or a portion of this lesson and provide feedback. The feedback provided can help you get a better sense of student engagement from an outside perspective. It might also provide fresh insight, ideas, and alternative approaches to try in the future. In this learning session, we considered some of the instructional planning practices you can employ to cause learning in a student-centered learning environment. In the next series of learning sessions, we will explore the question, what do my students know? With a focus on helping you become familiar with students' strengths and needs, learning styles, skills and abilities, and interests.